The fog had been sitting over the lake for 4 days. I watched it from the hospital cafeteria window, a cup of tea gone cold between my hands, and I thought about how grief moves exactly the same way, slow and low and suffocating, pressing against everything until you forget what the sky used to look like. My brother was on the 3rd floor. He'd been there for 11 days. Daniel is 55 years old. He coaches minor hockey on Saturday mornings and makes the best fish chowder in Bayfield and has never once complained about anything in his entire life, not even when his wife left, not even when the mill shut down and he lost his foreman job, not even when the doctor said the words myelodysplastic syndrome in that careful, padded way doctors use when they're trying to soften something that cannot be softened. He just nodded and asked what came next. What came next was a bone marrow transplant, immunotherapy following it, and a newer targeted drug therapy his oncologist believed gave him the strongest chance at 5 years, maybe more. The transplant itself was covered. The follow-on therapy was not. It had received approval in the United States 18 months earlier and was available at a clinic in Toronto, but provincial coverage in Ontario had not yet been extended to it. The appeal process, his specialist told me, could take anywhere from 8 months to 2 years. Daniel had maybe 4. The total cost of the full treatment course outside the provincial plan was $172,000. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a school librarian in Aldridge before I retired. I had a small pension, a paid-off house, and a savings account I'd been proud of until the moment I divided $172,000 by whatever I had left after selling my car and cashing out my RRSP early and asking the bank about a line of credit on the prize house. The number I arrived at was still impossible. I was sitting with that impossibility when a man in a gray suit appeared beside my table and asked if he might sit down. He introduced himself as Edmund Farr, a solicitor from Toronto. He placed a business card on the table between us with both hands, the way people do when they want you to understand they are being serious. He told me he represented a man named Victor Aldridge. He said the name as if I should recognize it. I didn't. Immediately. Then I did. Aldridge Heritage Properties. The firm that had restored the old courthouse in Aldridge 20 years ago. The one with the dome. The one everyone said couldn't be saved. I remembered reading about the architect behind it. I remembered thinking he must love this place to bother. Mr. Farr told me that Mr. Aldridge had been monitoring Daniel's case through a contact at the hospital. He told me that Mr. Aldridge was himself ill, that his prognosis was not good, that he was a private man who had lived alone for many years and found, facing the end of his life, that the solitude he'd always preferred had become something harder to bear. He told me that Mr. Aldridge would cover Daniel's full treatment, every dollar, in exchange for one thing. He slid a folder across the table. He would like a companion, Mr. Farr said, someone to be present, to share meals, to make the house feel less like a waiting room. He has perhaps 6 months. When he's gone, you would be under no obligation of any kind. He would ensure you are provided for. I looked at the folder without opening it. You're asking me to marry him, I said. Mr. Farr folded his hands. That is the legal structure he prefers, yes, for practical reasons. Easier, in terms of his being able to include you in certain arrangements. I am 63 years old, I said. He's 71, Mr. Farr said. He's not looking for anything beyond what I've described. I thought about Daniel on the 3rd floor. I thought about him asking the doctor what came next with that same quiet patience he applies to everything. I thought about his daughter, my niece, who is 7 and calls me Auntie Elle, and fell asleep in my lap at Christmas watching a film about a dog. How long do I have to decide? I asked. Mr. Farr said 48 hours. I didn't need 48 hours. The wedding happened on a Thursday morning in November in Mr. Farr's office on King Street in Toronto. There were 2 witnesses, Mr. Farr and a woman named Agnes Kowalski, who had been Victor's housekeeper for 26 years. Agnes had white hair braided back and a cardigan with a small embroidered bird on the pocket, and she squeezed my hand when I arrived, as if she'd been waiting for me. Victor was in a wheelchair. That was the first thing I noticed, and I felt ashamed afterward for being surprised. His illness, I'd been told, was a progressive kidney condition, end-stage renal disease on top of complications from a surgery 2 years ago, dialysis 3 times a week, his body slowly losing the argument it had been having with itself for some time. He looked like a man who had been handsome and hadn't yet quite finished being so. His hair was entirely white. His eyes were a pale, clear gray, like the lake on an overcast morning. And when he looked at me during the brief ceremony, they were steady and direct in a way I found unexpectedly steadying in return. "Thank you," he said afterward, quietly, while Mr. Farr gathered papers. He said it simply, without performance. "My brother needed help," I said. "I wasn't being noble." He almost smiled. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in years." His home was a Victorian house in the Annex neighborhood of Toronto, the kind of house that takes your breath a little when you first see it, not because it's showy but because it's cared for. 3 stories, dark brick, tall windows, a garden at the back that had clearly been something and was now waiting out the winter under a cover of dead leaves. Inside it smelled like old wood and turpentine and, faintly, from the kitchen, something Agnes was cooking that I couldn't name but that made me feel welcome before I'd taken my coat off. Victor showed me to a room on the 2nd floor. His was on the main floor, he explained, near the study and the bathroom and everything he needed without the stairs. He said this matter-of-factly, without embarrassment or apology, and I respected him for it. "You'll have full use of the house," he said. "Agnes can tell you where everything is." He paused. "I work in the mornings when I'm able. I tend not to be very good company before noon." "That suits me," I said. "I'm the same." Something flickered across his face. "Good," he said, and wheeled himself down the hall. Agnes materialized at my elbow the moment he disappeared. "Come and eat something," she said. I made borscht. She said it the way people say things that are not suggestions. The kitchen was warm and cluttered in a pleasant way. Ceramic tiles, a window over the sink with a herb garden on the sill that had been kept alive with genuine commitment. Agnes moved through it like she was part of the architecture. She'd worked for Victor since his wife died, she told me, setting a bowl in front of me. He'd been married once, briefly, in his early 40s. She died of an aneurysm at 44. He'd closed most of himself up after that and opened it all into work instead. "He designed beautiful things," Agnes said, sitting across from me with her own bowl. "He cared about them, whether they'd last. And now?" I asked. She looked at her borscht. "He's scared. He won't say so, but I've known him long enough. He's scared of going the way Margaret did. Suddenly, alone, without anyone beside him who knew his name. I understood that fear. I was 63 and I understood it very well. The first 2 weeks were careful and quiet, like 2 people learning the acoustics of a shared space before they trust themselves to speak normally in it. Victor was up by 7. I heard him moving below me, the soft machinery of his routine, and I'd come down around 8 and find coffee already made, Agnes at the stove, and Victor at the long kitchen table with papers spread in front of him, still consulting on a restoration project in Hamilton, even from his wheelchair, even now. He was meticulous. His handwriting in the margins of drawings was small and precise. He used a particular mechanical pencil he'd had for 40 years and refilled the lead himself. I noticed things like this because I had always been a noticer. 31 years of watching children find their way to books teaches you to pay attention to small things, to what people reach for without being told. Daniel's treatment had started. His oncologist in Toronto sent me weekly updates. The targeted therapy was showing early response. It was too soon to say anything definitive, but the word she used, cautiously, in her 3rd message, was encouraging. I went to see Daniel twice a week. He was tired but present, and he asked after Victor with the same careful politeness he applied to everything new. "He seems like a good man," Daniel said, during my 2nd visit. "From what you're telling me." "I barely know him," I said. Daniel looked at me. "You will." He was right, though the knowing happened slowly and in small moments. Victor asking me one evening, without looking up from his papers, whether I'd read a particular novel, and then a conversation about it that went on past midnight because neither of us noticed the time. Victor's wry, dry humor that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. The way he listened, fully, without interrupting, without formulating his response while you were still speaking. I hadn't met many people who listened that way. But something was bothering me. I'd been a librarian, not a nurse, but I'd raised 2 children mostly alone after my husband left, and I knew what sick looked like and what the progression of sick looked like. Victor was bad. I understood that. But the way he was bad didn't quite track. He would have good days, genuinely good, better color and better energy and sharper eyes, and then within 24 hours he'd fold. Nausea, fatigue that was total and sudden, a grayness that came back like a curtain being pulled. 3 times a week he went to a private clinic for dialysis. His nephew, Callum, picked him up and brought him home each time. Callum Aldridge was 38, Victor's sister's son, a property developer who worked with some of the family holdings. He was pleasant in the way of people who have learned pleasantness as a professional skill. He brought Victor things, supplements from a health shop downtown, herbal combinations he'd apparently researched, and Victor, who was skeptical of everything, took them with an acquiescence that struck me as unlike him. "He's always been good about Callum's suggestions," Agnes said when I mentioned it. "He feels guilty, I think, about not being closer to his sister when she was alive. He overcorrects with the boy." I asked Victor once, gently, why he'd stopped seeing his nephrologist. He'd mentioned it in passing, that the specialist appointments had been reduced. "Callum thought the drives were too hard on me," he said. "He's arranged for the clinic to send summaries instead." "But you could have a telehealth appointment," I said. "You wouldn't have to go anywhere." He looked at me with those clear gray eyes. "That's a reasonable point," he said. "I'll mention it." He didn't. 2 days later, when I brought it up again, he said Callum didn't think the specialist had anything new to add. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the room on the second floor, and I listened to the house, and I went through, methodically, the things I knew. Victor's good days, and his sudden collapses. The supplements Callum brought, which Victor took without checking, which was unlike a man who was precise about everything else. The cancelled specialist appointments. Callum's position as the primary beneficiary of Victor's estate, which Agnes had mentioned once without appearing to think it significant. The property holdings, the firm's intellectual archive, the restored buildings, the endowment Victor had built over 50 years. I got up at 2 in the morning and went downstairs for water. Victor was in the hall, on the floor beside his wheelchair, which had tipped against the wall. He was conscious, and his face was wet with effort, and he said, flatly, when he saw me, "Don't call anyone." I helped him up the way I'd helped people up my entire adult life, efficiently and without making them feel diminished by needing it. I got him into the chair. I got him water and then the prescribed medications from the cabinet, and I sat at the kitchen table with him while he caught his breath. "You got worse again today," I said. "After Callum brought me home." "Yes." "Does it happen often, after his visits?" He looked at me. Then he looked at his hands. "I hadn't thought of it in those terms," he said quietly. "I need to see the supplements," I said. He told me where Callum kept them. A kitchen cupboard, a row of identical amber bottles. I photographed the labels with my phone. Then I sat across from Victor in the kitchen at 2:30 in the morning, and I told him what I thought might be happening. Carefully, without certainty, because I had no certainty, only the pattern of small things that didn't add up. He was very still for a long time. "You could be wrong," he said. "I could be," I said. "I want to be." He looked at me with those gray eyes, and what was in them was not disbelief. It was the particular look of someone who has been suspicious of something for a long time and hadn't let themselves finish the thought. "What do you need?" he asked. In the morning, I called a pharmacist I trusted, a woman I'd known for years whose sister had gone to school with mine. I described the supplements without telling her why. She asked me to photograph the labels and send them. An hour later, she called back, and her voice was careful in the way that meant she was choosing words deliberately. "Some of these, Eleanor," she said. "On their own, they're fine. Together, at these concentrations, over several months, combined with impaired kidney function," she paused, "it would accelerate the deterioration significantly. It would look like the disease progressing. And there's something else in this one." She named a compound I didn't know. "It's used legitimately in some contexts, but at this dose, in someone with compromised renal function, it's damaging. Systematically damaging." I sat with the phone in my hand after she hung up. Then I called Mr. Farr. The police came that evening. Victor was tested at Toronto General, a full panel, nephrology and toxicology both. Callum was brought in for questioning, and 2 days later, arrested at his condo in Liberty Village. They found records on his laptop, emails to a commercial real estate developer in Mississauga about the availability of certain Aldridge properties, messages that assumed a timeline for Victor that Callum had been engineering himself. They found purchase records for the compounds. They found drafts of letters contesting the marriage, prepared in advance, in anticipation of Victor's death and my claim on the estate. He'd been doing it for 7 months. Victor's actual condition, the underlying arrhythmia, the kidney damage that had been real but manageable before the poisoning compounded it was, his nephrologist told us when she finally saw him again, treatable, not gone. But treatable, not 6 months. Not 1, if things had continued. But with proper care, proper medication, proper monitoring, and without Callum's supplements, years. Victor looked at her for a long time when she said this. Years, he repeated. She nodded. I expect so. He spent 3 weeks in hospital. I came every day. We talked the way we'd learned to talk, fully. Past the time we noticed, about his buildings and my books and Daniel's improving blood work and the garden at the back of the annex house that he'd been neglecting and wanted to fix. He told me about Margaret. I told him about my husband, the leaving and the years after, the way you rebuild a life around the gaps and eventually stop thinking of them as gaps. When they released him, his color was different. The gray was lifting. On the drive back to the house, Agnes in the front, Victor and I in the back, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Eleanor, I know this was never meant to be real. I looked at him. But if it became real, he said, I wouldn't know how to object. Agnes made a small sound in the front seat that was either a cough or the most restrained expression of triumph I had ever witnessed. I thought about the fog on the lake that morning in the hospital cafeteria. I thought about the cold cup of tea and the impossible number and the feeling that my life had become something I no longer recognized. I thought about all the things that had happened in the months since. The quiet mornings and the late conversations and the moment I'd sat across from this man at 2 a.m. and understood that I was frightened for him, genuinely frightened, in a way that had nothing to do with Daniel's treatment or my obligation or any of the terms we'd agreed on. I'd like that too, I told him. I think I'd like that very much. The legal proceedings took the better part of a year. Callum pled guilty to criminal negligence, causing bodily harm and fraud, among other charges. The sentencing hearing was in September, and I didn't go, because there was nothing I needed to witness there. Victor went, once, briefly, and came home quieter than usual, and sat in the garden until the light went, and then came inside and said, simply, it's done. Agnes made pierogies. We ate at the kitchen table and didn't talk about it again. Daniel finished his full treatment course in the spring. His oncologist used a different word than encouraging at that appointment. She said remission. She said it plainly, without padding it, which was how I knew she meant it. Daniel cried in the car afterward, for the first time in all of it. Not for long. Then he composed himself and asked if we could stop at Tim Hortons, because he'd been thinking about a proper double-double for 3 months, and the hospital coffee was, in his assessment, a crime against humanity. We stopped. We stayed for an hour. I told him about Victor. Properly. The parts I'd been holding back until there was something to tell. He listened the way he always listens. Then he said, I knew you'd find a way. You always find a way, Elle. I said, I didn't do this alone. He smiled, his old smile, the one I hadn't seen in a year. Nobody does, he said. That's sort of the point. Victor sold his interest in the development side of the firm, the parts Callum had been managing, not because he was forced to, but because he didn't want them. The architectural archive, the restoration work, the buildings he'd actually made those he kept. He went back to the Hamilton project, part-time at first, then more as the months passed, and his health steadied, and the wheelchair appeared only on bad days, and not every day. The house in the annex got its garden back. We worked on it together on weekend mornings, Victor directing from the edge of the flagstone path with the precision of a man who has strong opinions about where hostas should go, which I was learning was everywhere except where he put them the first time. Agnes brought coffee out and stood in the doorway and watched us argue about it with an expression of complete satisfaction. The foundation was Victor's idea, though it came from something I said. I'd been thinking about that week in the hospital cafeteria, about the families I'd watched in there, exhausted and trying to do math that wouldn't work out. Canada's system covered so much. The gaps were real, though. The wait times. The treatments that existed and were approved and were simply not yet covered in certain provinces. The people who fell into those gaps. Victor said, "We have enough. More than enough. Let's fill some gaps." We called it the Pharaoh Aldridge Fund. Pharaoh being my maiden name, which Victor insisted on including. Mr. Farr helped us set it up correctly. In the first year, the fund supported 17 families with treatment costs not covered under provincial plans. In the second year, 31. Last month, I received a call from a woman in Thunder Bay. Her father had needed a specific cardiac medication, quite new, not yet covered by the Ontario Drug Benefit Program. We'd helped 6 months ago. He was stable now, she said. Better than stable. He'd gone back to curling. She cried on the phone for a moment, then apologized. "Please don't apologize," I said. Victor was reading in the next room. I could hear him turn a page. Agnes was in the kitchen. The light through the tall windows was the particular gold of a November late afternoon, the same gray month it had all started in, only now the fog felt different. Not something pressing down, but something softening the edges of things in a way that was almost kind. I thought about Edmund Farr sitting down across from me with his card held in both hands, about the folder I hadn't opened right away, about the impossible numbers and the cold tea and the feeling of drowning very slowly in a waiting room while my brother disappeared floor by floor above me. I thought about paying attention. It is, I've come to believe, the most important thing a person can do. Not grand gestures, not perfect choices, just paying attention to the small things that don't add up, to the moment someone needs help before they say so, to the person sitting across from you in a kitchen at 2 a.m. who is telling you the truth because you asked. That's how we got here. Both of us paying attention to things other people had stopped noticing, and then, slowly, paying attention to each other. Victor found me standing in the front room with the phone in my hand after I'd hung up with the woman from Thunder Bay. "Good news?" he asked. "A man in Thunder Bay is curling," I said. He understood immediately, because he always does now, the way you understand someone you've spent enough mornings and evenings with that their reference points have become yours. He reached over and took my hand. I thought about fog, how you wake up to it some mornings, and it seems permanent, total, a condition rather than a weather, how it always lifts. We had dinner that night, the 3 of us, Agnes and Victor and I, at the kitchen table with the herb pots on the windowsill and the garden visible through the back window, bare now and waiting for spring, and the city making its quiet sounds beyond the old brick walls. Agnes had made hunter's stew, which she makes when she wants to mark something, though she'll never admit it's intentional. We talked about the fund. We talked about Daniel's daughter's hockey team. We talked about the Hamilton building, which was coming along, and which Victor had promised to show me when the interior was done. Agnes said, "More stew," and refilled both our bowls before either of us answered, which is the Agnes Kowalski method of decision-making and one I have come to find deeply reassuring. I watched Victor read the label on the bottle of wine he'd opened and make a small, satisfied noise of approval. And I thought about what a strange and complete thing it is to find yourself somewhere you could not have imagined, built from the wreckage of something that looked, at the time, like nothing could be salvaged from it. The fog was back the next morning. I stood at the kitchen window with my tea, watching it sit over the rooftops, dense and low and November permanent. Victor came in behind me and looked out over my shoulder. "Miserable morning," he said. I watched the fog. I thought about hospital cafeterias and impossible numbers and everything that had come from saying yes to a folder I hadn't even opened yet because there was nothing left to lose. "Actually," I said, "I think it's beautiful." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, I suppose it is." Agnes put bread in the oven. The kitchen filled with warmth. Outside, somewhere past the fog, the city was waking up. All those ordinary lives running alongside ours. People sitting in waiting rooms doing impossible math. People about to have things asked of them that seemed insane until they said yes. People on the edge of something they couldn't see yet because the fog was too thick. It always lifts. I have learned to trust that now.